Through the Gates is produced under the support of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management. That's our mission. We're engaged in fighting at every level so that wildlife management remains science-based and conservation continues to work for our wildlife. To learn more and join the movement, visit SaveTheHuntColorado.com. The North American model of wildlife conservation is the greatest conservation model in the world. It's a success story that should be shared and celebrated because everybody is a part of it.
Well, Dan, welcome to Bozeman again.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You put on more miles in the last few years than anybody I know.
Yeah, I feel like a race car driver, but a lot of it's been in the air. It's like fast and furious, and I never know where I'm coming or going.
Yeah, so Dan is here from Colorado. Dan has been the guy in charge of Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management.
Tongue tire.
Yeah, CRWM.
Yep.
Got that right?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So after your big victory last year, if people been under a rock, I guess, and you're in the hunting space and you didn't know about Proposition 127, do I have that number right?
Yep.
In Colorado, that you guys pulled off the victory of all victories on a ballot initiative. Anyone who doesn't know about that must have been out in the space station.
They didn't pay attention.
They didn't pay their power bill or something and haven't been able to listen to radio, TV, podcasts.
Yeah.
Because that was the talk of the world.
There were some people, too, that we found that didn't understand about 127, but they had heard about the fur ban or the fishing ban or whatever, and then they became educated on 127. And it was pretty remarkable because the average person, you would think, would pay more attention to a ballot initiative to take hunting privileges away than more so a fur ban when it had to deal with cowboy hats and fishing lures and Native American crafts. And that was just in the city and county of Denver.
Right.
And so when people said, "Oh, are you involved in that?" And I said, "Yeah, that and." Yeah. And they said, "And what?" And I'm thinking, well, the other one was the great big one.
Yeah, the big one, the 127.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, from afar, just admiring what you guys put together, the strategy you crafted. You guys went about this so much differently than a lot of the other ballot initiatives, defenses, whatever. We're always on the defense. So to see that many people come together, whether they were residents or non-residents, and say, you know what, this is kind of this is a battle that's so critical. It could be the pivot point of where this goes going forward, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And whether you wanted that responsibility or not, it kind of landed on your lap and that of a few others.
Yeah, you could stand around. I joked about it before, Randy. I thought they were saying brains and they were really saying train, and I think I got run over by it. And it was probably one of the hardest things that we had to do because we'd been advocating for these sort of things and been victorious for the better part of 7+ years with CRWM. Even though we'd played in this landscape for 15 years prior to that. Mm-hmm. But the average person doesn't have a clue of what it takes to run and be successful on a ballot initiative.
Right.
And for those people that don't understand it, there's 26 states that have ballot initiative opportunities for people, voters in the state, proponents of different measures to bring to the voters. Some of those might be constitutional and some of them might be statutory.
Right.
When we said this is, and keep in mind, this is just 3.5 or 4 years after we voted on wolves in the state.
Right.
And the difference being is wolves was to bring something in, and the majority of people said, "Oh, that'll never happen." But as soon as you started mentioning to take something away, a lot of the people, and I said this in some of our campaign speeches and stuff, a lot of the people, when we lost trapping in 1996 and spring bear hunting in 1992, a lot of the people that we were dealing with last year were 30 years old or 35 years old. So they never knew that we had what we had that was taken away. And then when we brought wolves in by voter initiative in 2020, they thought, oh, well, they won't take lion hunting away. They won't take bobcat trapping away. And because they'd never experienced losing anything.
Right.
And a lot of the people that were, well, if they were my age or your age in 92 or 96, well, they were mostly dead last year, so, they've been 85 or 90 years old last year. And so you're dealing with a completely different demographic and a dynamic of individuals that you stop and think 30 years ago when we lost those other two deals, we didn't have social media.
Right.
Most people didn't have cell phones, or if you did, it was a great big bag phone, looked like a backpack.
Yeah.
And so things changed dramatically, but we utilized the tools that were available and the knowledge and expertise that we'd been able to accumulate and see what we could do with it. And I think that we helped set a playbook and a roadmap that the antis for sure paid attention to because we kicked the crap out of them.
Yeah.
But then our side did as well because they weren't really sure how to do what we did, and we didn't know to start with. We had a pretty good idea, but we didn't know it either.
Yeah. Well, I remember sitting in on some of the first calls you guys had, and thankful that you guys invited me to be the fly on the wall, and a few of us from out of state just listen and see what you guys were doing, where we could maybe help. But the first thing that stood out to me was, this is different. This is strategy. Mm-hmm. This is real communication strategy other than 45 little groups out in your state or in a state. Then, well, we're going to do this. We're going to have a bake sale. We're going to throw that. No, you guys put it together. You hired the best that you could, and you were realistic about what the budget was going to be. I don't think people understand what it costs to defeat a ballot initiative.
No.
Or to run a ballot. If you wanted to change something via ballot initiative or defeat it, we're talking $5 million or more.
Or more.
Yeah. And it's airtime buy, it's billboard buy, it's all this messaging.
Yeah.
And when people hear that, they're like, it can't cost that much. It costs a lot.
Television advertisements during the election campaign, especially on a presidential election year, are 10 to 25 times more than what they would have been on a non-election year. It would be similar to if the Denver Broncos were to make it back to the Super Bowl and you wanted to advertise in Denver during the Super Bowl. It's going to cost you a hell of a lot more than if you just wanted the preseason game. Yeah. And that's what we'd been dealing with was preseason games. And while we'd been effective, the best time for somebody to run a ballot initiative is during a governor's race or a presidential race.
Right.
The worst time to have to fight a ballot initiative is during a governor's race and a presidential race.
Yeah.
And I mean, the costs are almost insurmountable. When you told people that, we needed $5 million for this or $100,000 for that or $50,000 for this, they just looked at you.
Right.
I mean, and just in the initial stages of what was spent from September of 23 when the ballot initiative was first filed up until January 31st of 24 when the ballot initiative was certified and that's the direction they decided to go, there was almost $300,000 spent in legal fees for the Secretary of State, Supreme Court, and the Title Board.
Yeah.
And people went, what?
Yeah.
That's the real cost. And we were prepared from a CRWM standpoint, but we had to build up an armament and convince everybody else that if we were successful getting through those stages like what we needed to, that we had to actually raise substantial money. It wasn't over in January 31st of 24. It just started.
Right.
And I think once we started to build up the message through individuals and groups and influencers and podcasters and industry leaders and stuff, people started to pay attention and go, holy crap, maybe there's a chance that these guys can actually win.
Yeah.
But I got to say, we wouldn't have been able to win if it wasn't been for guys like you and Renella's and the Howl for Wildlife guys and the Cable Smiths and the Sloan Browns. And I mean, everybody that came out of the woodwork to help us message-wise was tenfold. And then we had the NGOs and we had the individual industry leaders and the businesses and stuff. It didn't happen by happenstance. It wasn't by accident.
Right. No, and you're always quick to put the credit to everybody else, Dan, and I appreciate that, and I think that's what everybody likes about Dan is they know he's gonna kind of be like, no, this person. All that being said, it was remarkable. I hope that we can find ways that what you've built in Colorado, what you've learned in this process, can be expanded to other states because you guys had no longer defeated this. Then the same groups came to your commission, came to your legislature. These groups aren't giving up.
No.
Sometimes it'll be a ballot initiative. Sometimes it'll be a lawsuit. Sometimes it'll be trying to get something with your commission or with your legislature. And I know people in Montana are like, Newberg, you are just so wound up about Colorado and Washington. If I have to listen to one more podcast of you with someone from one of those states, I'm just going to hang up. Well, I've been around this game long enough to know that when something works in one state, it gets copied to other states. And when you guys lost your Wolf ballot initiative, it really invigorated the other side, if you want to call it other side. They had some successes in Washington, and it really invigorated them. I know those methodologies, those tactics, those processes, and those people and their money are going to be in my state of Montana someday. And as people are like, that never happened in Montana. Well, I'm not taking a chance on it.
They said that in 92 on the bear deal in Colorado, and that passed by 70 to 30%. Yeah. They said it in 96 about the trapping deal, that was a constitutional amendment, Amendment 14. And we fought that tooth and nail, but we still lost 52 to 48%. Stop and think, that's 30 years ago. That's before Colorado was as blue as what it is now. Right. That's before we had such an influx. I mean, we had 2.9 million people at that time, and now we got 5.9 million people. And a lot of those people don't hunt, and they don't fish, and they don't appreciate agriculture, and they don't really understand conservation. Yeah. To stop and think that we beat the proponents of these measures by the margins that we did on Ordinance 308 and 309 and Proposition 127, I mean, we had a trifecta. We talked about it. Mark Truex and PacWest Strategies and I talked about what if. Yeah. And he said, well, don't count your chickens before they hatch. I mean, he said that's a tall order. And he said, but if you do, you will have pulled off something that has not been pulled off in the better part of 30 years. Right.
And that's what interests me about all this. When you said, yeah, Randy, I'm going to be in Bozeman. I'm like, all right, I'll pick you up at the airport. But rather than pay an Uber, you got to do a podcast. Yeah. But you and I have spent a lot of time today talking about a lot of this stuff. And it's fascinating to me as someone who's a communicator, someone whose whole adult life has been involved in advocacy on these issues. I'm learning so much from watching how you guys have done things. My probably next biggest concern, or I don't know if it's a concern, but I hope that you're able to keep and sustain the methods, the momentum, the funding, everything else, because let's face it, the hunting community is notorious for maybe raising a little bit of noise for a while, and then if it goes away, it's like, we'll worry about it again in 2 years. Mm-hmm. Well, the type of thing that you guys put together to actually win, and I'm here to win, okay? I'm not here to just talk and carry on. I want to be on the side that wins, and you guys pulled that off. I worry that we could get complacent, that maybe we're going to be like, Dan, great job, you guys down there, you did a good job, and then we go away. And you guys continue to have to fight this stuff. Mm-hmm. There's other states where these ballot initiatives are coming. And I worry that some people think that, well, maybe a couple months before that election date, we'll spin up an organization and we'll put up a fight. No, you guys have demonstrated that it takes, you got to be there all the time. Mm-hmm. And to be there all the time takes people, and it takes money. It takes folks with your skill set, your relationships, your ability to understand the unique way that stuff happens in Colorado. Mm-hmm. Need consultants like Mark Truex and his group. There's just so many people. I had Gaspar on the podcast, and he's like, most people have no idea how complicated it is to coordinate all this if you're here to win. Mm-hmm. If you're here to just say, well, we put up a good fight, well, you can do that on a week's notice. But if you're here to win, you got to be there ready all the time anticipating what's going to come in 2 years and 4 years, and have that ready
and
to go.
at the same time, and I agree with you 100%, at the same time, be adaptive enough to where, like last year when we were dealing with the ballot, we had legislative issues and we had commission issues simultaneously.
Yeah.
And most of our groups, most of our predecessors, including ourselves up to a point, were not prepared to fight two, let alone three things at the same time, and then raise $3.5 million to turn around and try to send something over the edge. We were being assaulted and attacked at every single level, and some of it was small, some of it was medium, but the big stuff was the time-consuming part. It was the message. One thing you didn't want to do is you didn't want to get astray on your message, because if you were on this level, maybe that would not be complementary to the other level that you're fighting. And then the antis would turn around and modify or adapt their challenges on the ballot.
Right.
I think that one of the things that you and I talked about before was looking at the historical level of what our community has done. We've done really good at preparing for things that we want to do, and we haven't done a very good job on preparing for things that we never thought was going to happen, but we would hope that we would never have to.
Right.
And I say that because, we talked about this last year when I was on, and your generosity that you gave us in the campaign. It's really hard to convince people that the inevitable is going to happen when all they care about is preference points and where they're going to go, and what. Look, we've all got private lives and stuff, but the antis are so well organized and so well funded and formulated that they can do Arizona and New Mexico and Montana and Ohio and Colorado at the same time, and they could do it at different levels than they could do it at the commission and the legislature and then run ballots, or just do this subliminal messaging campaign. I mean, I talk about this on several different podcasts, and with the ones that we're doing ourselves, which we've taken the guidance from you and others to help us get across the threshold on that. But during the holiday season, you see commercials come out on television, network television, from the Humane Society of the United States, which is now the Humane World for Animals, from the ASPCA, from the World Wildlife Fund, from a variety of different things that we're all interested in some capacity, but they're trying to capitalize on the public's generosity. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing in my mind Christmas doesn't fall before the election cycle, because we couldn't generate enough money to combat a ballot initiative if Christmas was where Halloween is, and Halloween is where Christmas is. I think we would be SOL.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that we're at the end of anything at this point in time.
Right.
But I am convinced that the playbook and the roadmap that we built as a community not only has been recognized, but it's also been documented. Mm-hmm. And to the point that I told you before, that we went from 5 lobbyists in the state of Colorado from major animal extremist organizations during the campaign to 18 this year.
Right. In your legislature.
In our legislature.
18 lobbyists.
Yes.
From what we would call the other side.
The other side. Yeah. Went from 5 to 18. Now, the flip side, one of the good things is, as I mentioned, during our legislative sportsmen's caucus that we've got with the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, last year we had 4 legislators in our sportsmen's caucus. This year we've got 14. Some of those are Democrats. Matter of fact, 8 of the 14 are Democrats. Mm-hmm. The reason I say that is because this is not a Democrat-Republican issue. It just so happens that there's no independents in the Colorado General Assembly, so you're going to have Democrats or Republicans. But if we can get that sort of an interest out of both sides of the aisle, maybe we can make a dent when it comes to the legislative side of things, as we saw in March. I think it was March 5th, where we beat back House Bill 1258, which would have turned around and altered the entire makeup of Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the ability to manage wildlife. Right. And it was from the exact same people and from the exact same organizations that we just beat the crap out of on Proposition 127. And they came back to the General Assembly to say, ooh, wait a minute. Yeah, the voters didn't really mean this over here. They meant this. So if you could turn around and run a bill. Well, we beat that bill back in March of this year 10-3 in a Democrat legislature, where that particular committee is made up 8-5,
Yeah.
Democrats versus Republicans. Those are noteworthy efforts on our behalf, the sportsman community as a whole, because what we did in November was not an anomaly. We did it in 22, we did it in 21, and in 20, and 19, and 18, and we did it at the big time level, the Super Bowl, in November of last year. But we just started preseason and spring training and all the other stuff, and now we're just going through the hoops and the hurdles trying to make sure that we don't lose.
Yeah. Well, to that end, or to continue towards that goal, I'm interested in a couple unique things in Colorado that we don't have here in Montana. In Montana, we don't have a group like CRWM that's a 501c4 organization, which is different than a 501c3. And some people might ask, well, what's the difference? As a CPA, I'll just give the quick and dirty. 501c is the tax code section that allows for nonprofit groups. C3 is for what we'd call public charities, right? We donate to lots of them. Your money to them is deductible, or to you is deductible when you make donations. It's not taxable to them. That's why they're called a nonprofit. Then there's a 501c4 where my donations to a 501c4 are not going to be deductible. But the flip side of that behind the scenes is for a 501c3, you're very limited in how you can be engaged in politics, legislation, elections, and lobbying. Almost to the point where you almost don't even dare tread there if you're a 501c3 organization, because someone will threaten to pull your nonprofit status. 501c4, you can be heavily engaged in this stuff. So we don't have one of those in Montana. We also don't have, you guys, and I'd like a little more depth on this, of you guys have a thing in Colorado, I think it's called a wildlife council or something like that, where some money out of every time I apply for a tag or buy a license or whatever, some money goes to this. And it's actually a Colorado institution. It's nonpartisan. It's
set up by the legislature back in 1998. Yes,
98? Okay. So tell me how that works, because you guys are putting out amazing campaigns. I remember the Hug a Hunter campaign. Is that the one? Did that come out of there?
That came out of there.
Yeah.
That was the one where sportsmen said, the first guy that comes up and hugs me while I'm standing in the river, I'm going to drop him.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of tongue in cheek on things. So the Colorado Wildlife Council was formulated back in 1998. To the best of my recollection, there was $200,000 worth of seed money that came from sportsmen and women that went to the General Assembly at that time and said, we need a messaging campaign. Now, keep in mind, this is post-96 on the trapping deal and post-92 on the bear initiative. And so the sportsmen came together and said, we have to have a message of some sort that is going to the general public, what we consider the target audience.
Right, and that being the message is the value of wildlife, scientific management, how wildlife is important to your economies, to your society, to your cultures. And that council helps fund campaigns around those messaging points.
Yeah, it's the exact verbiage is to create a messaging campaign, an education campaign to show the benefits of hunting and fishing. Okay. And so the benefits of hunting and fishing, as you and I discussed before, I mean, in Colorado, like this year, it's a $7.25 billion with a B. Economic impact, 25,000 jobs. It helps manage a $400 million agency with 961 species of wildlife, 78 of which are game species. I've said this over and over and over to the point where maybe some people would think it's redundant, but it's worth mentioning that there are only 2 wildlife councils in the entire country.
Right. That's what's so unique. And what other state has
Michigan?
Michigan. Colorado and Michigan have these. They're kind of a hunter-angler funded thing, correct?
Yeah,
I pay a couple bucks.
Ours comes from $1.50 per license that is sold.
Okay.
To the totality of about $3 million, give or take, a couple $100,000 per year.
Okay.
And that money it goes into a pot that is then distributed to the council. So if you sell more licenses, like during COVID, there's a little bit more money to spend. If you sell less licenses, there's a little bit less. But the council was created with 9 members, and those members are from different demographic representations. There's a East Slope hunter, which is what I was, and then there's a West Slope hunter.
Okay.
Then you got the East Slope angler and the West Slope angler, and then there's some ag representatives. You got a general at large representative. You got a municipality and a advertising agency, and then there's one individual that is a representative for Colorado Parks and Wildlife that is still a voting member. And the reason it's important to talk about that is because, for those that don't know, I was the chair of the Wildlife Council for 3 years. I sat on it for 8, but it just so happened that cross-pollination, that intersection of the campaign of 127 crossed at the same time that I'm the executive director of CRWM and the chair of the Colorado Wildlife Council. Now, I want to initiate the conversation to the point to where our council in Colorado cannot engage in ballot initiatives. Right. They can't say vote no, vote yes. We can't engage in legislative issues. Right. Can't say vote no, vote yes. That's the way it was originally structured back in 1998. Now, anybody could argue if that's the best way to go. I think it probably is, maybe with some different leniency or sideboards or parameters on it. But why it's important is because when we started formulating our message prior to the campaign for the council side of things, we were doing things for the benefits of hunting and fishing.
And this was way before you knew there was a ballot
18 months
initiative.
Before there was a ballot initiative.
So you guys are just saying our plan is we want to continue our messaging around the importance of hunting and fishing in Colorado.
Yep.
With no idea there's a ballot initiative.
No, we knew that we had fought different things on the private sector, which the council was not part of.
Right.
And then when we beat back, when the sportsman community beat back Senate Bill 31 in February of 22, that was to ban mountain lion and bobcat harvest.
Okay.
We beat that back. The council and I started talking. I was the chair at the time, and I said, we need to figure out a way to better message to the target audience on the Front Range. And so the contractor that we had hired, R&R Partners, and the council ourselves came up with a strategy on how we would implement a plan of action moving forward, which just turned out to be, you stop and think, that was in February of 22, and then the ballot was actually dropped in September of 23. And so roughly 18 months to get our ducks in a row for something that we thought was probably inevitable in some capacity.
Could be 2 years down the road or 10 years down the road.
But we knew that the general public supported science-based wildlife management.
Yeah.
Now, stop and think. 18 months prior to September of 23, the tagline that the council came up with that came from focus groups and polling and studies and data and information was science in the wild. It went from hug a hunter to the economic side to science in the wild. And then lo and behold, when Truex and I and Pac West turned around and did whatever polling we could do along with the help of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, we did what we did and found out that science-based wildlife management was the way that the general public preferred their wildlife to be managed appropriately, whether they hunted or whether they didn't.
Right.
So you take the Science in the Wild campaign that was established 18 months prior to the ballot, and then the science-based wildlife management side of things, which was formulated shortly thereafter when the ballot initiative was proposed. You put those two together, there's a lot of cross-pollination and intersection that you can turn around and utilize. The facts and the data that we utilized and that we could justify actually help draw out the lies and the deceits and the fallacies and falsehoods from the other side, from the antis. Yeah. And I think that while they got butt hurt over it, so to speak, they were pissed that I was on the chair of the council. They thought that was commingling of funds and it was conflict of interest. Nothing could be further from the truth. It just so happened that the general public had the same mentality, the same foresight to think that we don't want extremists managing our wildlife, and that came about well before the campaign ever even started.
Right. So Colorado has these two unique things that, in my mind, and my head is spinning about my state of Montana. And if I lived in any state where there's controversial species, like here we got wolves, we got grizzly bears, we got wolverines, we got mountain lions, we got them all.
Got everything.
if I lived in a state such as that, which I do, my mind would start thinking about this and saying, all right, how do I kind of do an autopsy on the Colorado thing and figure out how do I start the process of doing some of these unique things? Maybe it's 10 years before I have a ballot initiative I got to worry about in Montana. Maybe it's 2026, a year away.
Yep.
My mind is like, hey, Dan, I hope you keep taking my calls, and I hate to be a pest, but I got a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And you've been so generous, not just to me, but to so many other people, I think, who are asking these same questions. And we want to see what you guys did, the model that you came up with, the strategies, the planning. I want to see those happening in other states. And I don't want to see them happening 2 weeks before an election. I want to start, and this is going to be an ask of our industry. It's going to be an ask of us as hunters. We're going to have to start putting some money towards this stuff.
You have to be proactive, and of course, it sounds like I'm trying to rah speech everybody in the industry now because, while we were active, not everybody knew who we were, and now, I mean, most people to some degree. And I was in Denver International Airport this morning before I flew up here, and this guy, he stood over there and he was looking at me, and I thought he was either a stalker and going to try to kill me, or he recognized, and he came over and he said, "Excuse me, are you Dan Gates?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, I went to one of those banquets that you presented at, and I sure appreciate everything you did. And he said, my brother actually hunts mountain lions. And he said, man, he was just so tickled to death. I said, where does he hunt? And he goes, New Mexico. I mean, what we created and who we touched through the whole campaign is remarkable enough. But here's the deal, Randy. Everybody's seen on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, a barn raising of 300 Amish where they actually turn around and pick a barn up and, haul it a mile down the road or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to do now. Some people don't. Prepare for when they have to paint their house. They start looking at it and go, well, I need to paint the house. If you let it go too far, maybe you don't just paint it. Now you need to replace the side and maybe do a new roof or maybe do new trim or whatever. Look how many guys prepare 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 years on where they're going to hunt. Mm-hmm. If they would just turn around and prepare a little bit of saving the hunt, like what we've convinced a large segment of the population to do, it sounds nerdish or cliche-ish, but if everybody would just turn around and give 8 hours a year, just 8 hours a year, not to a banquet, not to a fundraiser, not scouting, not listening to the Randy Newburg or the Through the Gates podcast or what.
Yeah.
Go to a commission meeting, write a letter to your legislators, turn around and engage with the elected officials, the decision makers, and actually participate in the fight. You figure if Montana has 1 million sportsmen and women in and out of the state, resident and non-resident, and Colorado's got a little over that, and if they say that we've got 13 or 14 million sportsmen and women in the country, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 10 or whatever.
Right.
8 hours a year.
1 day out of your.
We would be undeniably the most formidable opposition on the planet.
Yep.
And I say this because visualize that Amish barn raising. If we knew that something was really going bad at the Texas border, and we weren't just turning around and griping about people coming, but they were invading us, would we stand idle? Mm-hmm. California? The Canadian border?
Yeah.
No, I think that we would turn around and lock arms as a country and then figure out how you're going to defeat the enemy and then go back to solving your differences internally when you turn around. But I don't want the bow hunters and the elk hunters and the duck hunters and the trappers and the bird hunters to be against each other at any time. And I know they always don't agree, but we proved the fact that claiming the name of a sportsman that bow hunts or a sportsman that duck hunts or a sportsman that traps or a sportsman that fishes, we became sportsmen. And if you listen to the antis, and this sounds nerdish, but you listen to the antis, they said, we are up against sportsmen. They didn't say they were up against trappers and lion hunters. They said they were up against sportsmen. We created the facade, and then they carried the message. And as Wayne Pacelli said in some of his comments as I told
who
you
is
earlier.
a former
CEO of HSUS.
right, the Humane Society of the U.S., who's
Yep.
always got his fingers in this kind
He's
of
got
stuff.
his fingers in everything, and he said we are up against the most formidable, well-funded, organized, strategized opposition in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
That was us.
Right,
And then we beat them.
right.
Well, not only are we the most well-funded and organized and strategized, we're the badasses right now. And that's why they've got 18 lobbyists in the state of Colorado trying to figure out how we're going to prepare for the next 20 months of this governor, for the next election cycle in 2026, the next legislative session in 2026, the commission selections and appointments. But I want to emphasize, it's not just Colorado.
Right.
It's festering in every state that they want to turn around and engage in. You and I talked earlier. Oregon, Washington. Look what Chris Watson and those guys are going on down in Arizona. Look what they did this year during the legislative session in New Mexico. Look what they're trying to do in other states like Idaho and even in Montana and Wyoming to some degree. We're talking about the West.
Right.
But it's happening at an alarming rate in the Midwest and the eastern states as well. It's just that they don't have the big game populations.
Right.
They don't have all the predator type stuff. Now they got some bears and they've got some, fur bears and stuff.
Right.
But the West has become the launching pad for these groups. And then they fester out. I did a commission meeting in Colorado last week, and one of the testifiers got up and said that a podcast that I was on, I called them locusts on a cornfield. And that they should not be supporting somebody like me that says locusts on a cornfield. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, explain it any other way. I mean, it's just they come in mass numbers, and their desire is to eat every single thing in sight that has to do with conservation and sportsmen and women.
Yeah. No, it's that. I hope that's, I don't know if warning is the right word. I hope that's something that people are thinking about, because there's only one Dan Gates to, in the team.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want too many of this one. You could have different versions of it.
Okay. But we need to replicate and find people like you who have relationships, have the ability to communicate this, understands the processes within their state. Because for me to come to your state and try to advocate, I don't know your laws about, registered lobbyists. I don't know your laws about ballot initiatives. We're kind of kidding ourselves if we think we're going to have one national group that's going to have our bases covered. This is local stuff. It is local relationships. It's knowing who the players are. It's knowing what the laws are, where the communication platforms are. And I hope that we don't just look in the rearview mirror and say, we won the Super Bowl, let's spike the ball and everybody go home. Mm-hmm. Because there's more games coming, like you've pointed out here. Yeah. And the sooner we get that infrastructure in place, whether it's people, whether it's groups, whether it's funding mechanisms, whatever it is, the sooner that we get it in place, by far, the greater the likelihood that we're going to end up with victory. And hopefully.
Yeah. And I think some of our problems that we run into are the head in the sand, the complacency with mediocrity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't affect me. I don't lion hunt, or that's not going to happen here. That'll never happen here. But anybody that has paid attention to things like what you've been dealing with on the public land issues, or they talk about, we had this attempt at a citizen's petition, which could be potentially become a ballot initiative about live bait in the state of Colorado. And we're not talking about chickens and bobcat cages, because that's already illegal. We're talking about minnows and night crawlers and crickets.
Yeah.
It's live bait. And people go, oh, that can't be true. And you look at it, and you look at things that are so outlandish that the average person could not comprehend in any way, shape, or form. And I think that, going back to my assumption that if people just gave 8 hours a year, even if they just turn around and paid attention to the stuff that's not the shiny object, that's the most boring, benign crap that you have to ever live with. But if you start paying attention, you go, well, when did that happen? Yeah. Well, how did this happen? I mean, look at Colorado as an example. The gun bills that came through our legislature this year.
Crazy.
But a lot of them started last year, and it wasn't so bad. It wasn't that big of a deal. But then they turn around and got it passed last year, and then they turn around and add to it this year.
Yep.
Now, they wouldn't have got them both done in the same year. That's why they did it that way. But the things that people say, well, that's a constitutional right. Maybe it is, but who's going to fight it?
Exactly. It's a constitutional right as long as you're willing to take it to the courts.
Exactly.
And defend your right.
Yeah. And so if they can do what they can do, whether it's legislatively or ballot initiative or otherwise, if they can do that on a right, how do they not do that on a privilege like hunting and fishing? Now, some states have the right to hunt and fish.
Right. Which we do in Montana, but it's still under attack.
Exactly.
And, some of them say, well, as long as you get the right to hunt for one day a year, you've met your constitutional requirement.
I was told facetiously that as long as, because the way Colorado's set up, as long as they gave you permission, if they wanted to give you permission to hunt starlings with a rock, and made that a legal method to take, that would be your right to hunt. It doesn't have to give you an unequivocal right for 78 game species like what we have.
Yeah, and that's where I think some people, myself, let's face it, Dan, we're all human. There's things that come across or should come across my newsletters or my emails, and they don't, and so I end up being unaware. Mm-hmm. But I don't think there's any reason for us to not be aware, at least of the things happening in, I always call it our backyard. What I mean is our state. Okay, maybe you aren't going to be worried about what's going on in Illinois or Washington or, wherever. But it's imperative that we know what's going on in our own states, because that's where we have the most influence.
That's where you got the most influence, but that's where people should be paying attention. And often I get people that say, did you hear what Arizona's doing? And they might live in Wyoming. And I said, yeah, it's pretty bad. Did you hear what you're doing in Wyoming? And they're like, what's that? Because it wasn't the shiny object.
Right.
I'll mention this, and it's Initiative 82, which might very well be the next ballot initiative that we have to deal with in Colorado.
Okay. So you pulled it up on your phone there?
Yeah. And so it's the Colorado Wildlife and Biodiversity Protection Act. Now, they're trying to go through the title board, the Secretary of State, and eventually the Supreme Court. But what this would do would essentially upend Colorado Parks and Wildlife to make it non-existent.
Really?
Now, if you look at what the New Mexico legislature just did this year, they changed the name, then they changed the scope, and they went through all this hoopla about the ecosystem and the biodiversity side. They did that legislatively, but they don't have ballot initiatives in the state of New Mexico.
Okay.
Almost the same language, not in totality, but verbatim. And this would actually create another commission that would be not selected by the governor, but it wouldn't have any wildlife advocates on there, and it wouldn't have anything to do with anything like what Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing now, similar to what could be interpreted out of New Mexico. This commission would have the authority to identify keystone species to where you couldn't do anything for any reason on any piece of ground that a keystone species was on. They could do abert squirrels if they wanted to. Maybe it was wolves. Maybe it was sage-grouse. Maybe it was black-footed ferrets. Right. Those, to some degree, would be endangered or threaten their keystone. But what if they did that to moose or bobcats or prairie dogs? Because this commission, it would not allow them and wouldn't not allow them to do any of it. And there's a component in here. It talks about defunding and disbanding the current makeup of what we have. So this other one,
Parks and Wildlife.
Yes. So this other one would automatically replace that. Now, the worst part about that is this is a 9-page ballot initiative that they're circulating through the Legislative Council and the eventual Secretary of State and the Title Board. If you read anywhere into the 9 pages and you just look at and you say that can't pass, there's no way that's not going to pass. Read the title. Colorado Wildlife and Biodiversity Protection Act. The same target audience that we talk to trying to convince them not to vote on mountain lion and bobcat harvest or to vote positive on our end. Those are the same people we'd have to turn around and convince. So now here we talk about the science.
Right.
We talk about the data, the science in the wild, and you want to turn around and put this ballot initiative in front of them. And for any animal rights extremist or anti that's listening to these type of podcasts, they might sit there and go,
Yeah.
we got these guys and we can turn around and do whatever we want. The reality is, I don't think that the target audience on the Front Range, the 4.9 million voters on the Front Range of Colorado, or the several 100,000 in Wyoming, or the million or whatever in Montana, I don't think that they're ignorant enough to fall for the lies and fallacies and falsehoods. However, you don't have to worry about falling for it if there's nobody there to turn around and oppose it, like what CRWM did on Proposition 127.
Right.
You have to have a strategy. You have to have that Amish barn raising community. You have to have the preparation in what you know is inevitable. And I think stuff like this is inevitable.
Yeah.
And even if it's not and it doesn't go through circulation this go around,
It's coming.
it's coming.
Yeah.
Because you can see what they tried to do in Oregon with IP3, an animal sanctuary state. You wouldn't be able to kill a mouse. You couldn't raise chickens. You couldn't fish. You couldn't squirrel hunt. You couldn't raise cows.
Yep.
That is not a far-fetched idea for a lot of these groups. And if you don't have groups propped up to oppose that sort of stuff, well, it could happen in Ohio.
Right.
It could happen in Tennessee. It could happen in Texas.
It could happen anywhere at any time. And that, I'm glad you brought that up for a couple of reasons. One is it shows just how well funded these groups are.
Oh, yes.
And so they got full-time staffers who, attorneys, others, who that's their job, is to
That's
come
their
up
job.
with stuff
That's
like
what
that
they do.
and coordinate with other states of, hey, what's working in this state? What's working in that state? The fact that that is very similar to what's in New Mexico, if we look at, there's some commonalities to these groups that are really trying hard to take advantage of their window of opportunity in Washington, in New Mexico, in Colorado. They're all the same groups funding and coordinating this.
Yes.
And so I guess if there's a takeaway to it, it's we can't fall asleep. We can't forget how you were able to pull that off last November in Colorado. And we need to start preparing and stocking the shelves for the fact that it's coming.
How much toilet paper did people buy during COVID?
Yeah.
That's preparation. We spent more time
We're
in
still
preparing
using
for
it
toilet
up.
paper than we do on ballot initiatives. I mean, that the analogy seems comical, but stop and think.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, as I told you, when I walked out of the Capitol during Sportsman's Day at the Capitol, and I had the guy call me, and I thought, we had 600 people at the Capitol. They were coming down for the wild game feed.
Right.
And I didn't recognize the number, and I picked up. I said, "Hi, this is Dan." Dan. I won't say the guy's name. I don't want to put him on the spot. But he says, "I just want to know where are you selling your bobcats, and what money do you think they'll bring?" Now, this is the 25th of April.
Yeah.
We have 600 people at the Capitol with legislators and sportsmen and women, and this guy wants to know how much bobcats are going to bring and where I'm going to sell them. And I told him, I said, I didn't get a chance to trap bobcats this year or hunt bobcats this year. I was fighting a ballot initiative.
Yeah.
But I bet he had a bunch of toilet paper left over from COVID. I bet he did.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, and the point of that is that, we can find reasons not to be engaged. And when we prioritize our time, back to your idea of if people could just give 8 hours a year. I look at how many people are out there complaining on social media or, whatever platform it is. If they just gave a fraction of that time to the positive causes, to being an affirmative advocate for what we do, we, like you said, we would really have something. And in a busy world, I know it's like, the one I often hear is, I don't do politics. Well, if you don't do politics, politics is going to do you.
If whether you vote or not, you are part of politics.
Yeah.
and speaking of the vote, even last year in 2024, it wasn't as bad as it was in 2020. We got out the vote. But we heard many, many times over and over and over from 2020 that there was a significant amount of gun owners and sportsmen and women, Republicans and Democrats alike, that didn't take their opportunity to go out and show their vote.
Yeah.
to me, that's appalling, especially when people are sitting back and griping about losing on the ballot initiative for wolf introduction in 2020 by 1.9%. They're griping about it, and then you find out they didn't vote.
Right.
You have no reason
not.
Now, if anybody's listening to this podcast or my podcast or anybody else's, and they didn't vote, and we're knocking them down, well, I'm sorry, but I tell you what, the reason that we're trying to be prepared and the reason that we gripe about a lot of the results on these other things is because we didn't turn around and do what we needed to as a community.
Yeah.
And I said many, many times last year, whether you voted for somebody or you didn't, if they are speaking on your behalf, you need to let them know who you are.
Right.
And if they're speaking on your behalf and you didn't vote for them, you have no reason to gripe. And if they're speaking on your behalf and you did vote for them and they didn't do what you wanted, you should let them know politely and professionally with a level of civility and decorum and say, I'm a constituent of yours, and I would appreciate if you'd pay attention to my family's perspectives when it comes to these type of issues.
Yeah.
They need to know you're a business owner. They need to know that you're a 7th-generation cattleman or whatever. They need to know who their people are, because if they're not hearing from them, they don't know.
Right. No, and the other groups will blast them full of form letters, full of emails, full of everything else. And if they don't hear from us, they're like, well, I guess that's what everyone's thinking over there. All these, campaigns that we get hammered by. If our side isn't speaking up, and I can't tell you how many times I've been to presentations or got up and give testimony where someone says, well, finally, where have you hunters been for all this time? I haven't heard from any of you. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, man, this is not a good outcome. They can't read our minds.
No. We did it. We had a gal do a GIS overlay, and it was kind of screwy the way we had to do it because Colorado did a redistricting a couple years ago, and we didn't have the exact numbers, but they were within a couple hundred of each different district. So when we redistrict, we had pretty good numbers of how many hunters were in specific target areas that were Senate districts or legislative representative districts. And so we compiled a bunch of that stuff for current legislators. And when we gave it to them, mostly by zip codes within the geographical area that they represented, when we gave it to them, they went, what? There's 38,000 licensed buying sportsmen and women in my district? What? There's 56,000 licensed buying women and sportsmen and women in our district? They had no idea because they might have lived in Aurora and Arapahoe County. Maybe they lived in Summit County. Maybe they lived in Larimer County. But they had no idea that their people in those counties or those districts went out and recreated consumptively or attempted to or took their guns for a walk or whatever they did.
Yeah.
They had no idea that there was that much of a demographic. Those type of things matter because if they didn't know that and they're actually looking at voter numbers, we need to do a better job of making sure that they know who we are collectively and individually out of those geographical areas.
Yeah. Well, so much of that, what you just pointed out there, it comes back to us being more assertive, being less defensive and more offensive. And I'm hoping, and I know you would do this, Dan, because I've known you long enough and seen you in action. I'm hoping that people are hearing this. And I'm hoping it's causing them to think about their state. And I'm hoping that they, either through email, through phone, through whatever, get a hold of CRWM and say, hey, I got some issues in my state. Me and 20 other guys and gals or 5 of us groups, we want to get ready in our state. Is what you guys have done in Colorado replicable? And over, the course of a couple of years, could someone or a group of motivated people get up to speed on that?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, there's a plethora of organizations out there like what you mentioned,
right?
And you and I are probably members of the majority of them.
Yeah.
My wife is like, how many magazines do you get every month? Why don't you get the digital version? I'm like, well, when I'm old and 95, sitting in the nursing home, maybe I get a chance to thumb through some stuff, and they won't let me have my phone or my computer then. But no, I think. With us being a C4, and we recently formulated a C3 to go along with the 4.
Okay.
But the C3 will be the primary education arm, which is what a C3 can do.
Right.
And the C4 will be a combination of education and advocacy and political advocacy. And that being said, we've got lobbying representation at the Colorado State Capitol, which by the way, I mean, if anybody's listening, it costs money. And it costs money to have representation at any capital.
Right.
The reason that politics become politics is because politicians get funded from other entities and special interest groups, and there's lobbyists out there, whether it's oil and gas or maybe it's solar and wind.
Whatever.
There's people out there. It's pharmaceutical, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's unions, maybe it's teachers. There's lobbyists out there to get done what they want to get done. Well, sportsmen need to have that. Well, we do in Colorado.
Right.
We didn't, but we do, and we have had for the last 7.5 years. But anybody could create something like what CRWM has become. But I don't want them to think that we have the only roadmap in the model, the playbook. It's just that the one that we have has been proven. It didn't happen overnight. When the ballot initiative dropped on September 22nd of 23, we had hired Truex and we had hired the attorneys and we had already secured our dates in court within 3 days of the filing. Mm-hmm. In Colorado, there wasn't another entity that was capable of
Right.
maneuvering or manufacturing some sort of strategy probably in less than 30 days.
Right.
And even at that, they might not have had the funding. But we had prepared and we had formulated our plan of action because of our previous victories that I mentioned through the Commission and the General Assembly. And just through a messaging campaign that we did. And so if somebody in New Mexico or somebody in Kansas or Montana or whatever wanted to turn around and do something, we would be more than willing to sit down with them and say, this is what we did. Now, your state might be different, but this is what we did. And this is something that you might be able to capitalize on. But what I will say is you have to have a reason to do it. Don't do it just thinking that you're going to do it in hopes of. You have to have intention and you have to be strategized on how you're going to be able to accomplish that. And when my good buddy Chris Journey and I formulated on our own CRWM, we did so with the intent to make sure that we could promote, enhance, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management, period. No membership, no initial fundraising, no big banquets and all the other stuff. Now, we're doing some of that now because we had to during the last year of the campaign. But when we formulated, our goal was to do just that and to have legitimate lobbying representation at the Colorado State Capitol, which we accomplished the first year with one lobbyist, then two lobbyists, and then last year we've had as many as 3 lobbyists on the floor.
Yeah, wow.
That's a badass statement from a small organization that realized that if you didn't do something substantial, which we've proven our worth over the last 7-8 years, but if you didn't do something substantial, you would get run over, especially in Colorado, where we have this particular gubernatorial administration, which is an animal rights-oriented, agenda-driven organization. I say organization because the way the first gentleman has treated the office there that he was not elected to, that he gets to turn around and make the directions on everything that comes wildlife, everything that comes animal husbandry. They discount and discredit the agriculture community, the outfitter community, the sportsman community, the rodeo community, the pet ownership community. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. They don't think you should do it. And if you do it, they think you should do it their way when they have no knowledge about it. So New Mexico doesn't have the same hurdles, but they've got the same challenges.
Yeah.
Arizona's got similar.
Yeah.
California, I don't know what to think about California. I was told the other day by Barry Snell with the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation that California actually has a better wildlife commission than Colorado. And I thought, we must be the bottom of the sludge pile. I mean, because everybody thinks about California and thinks that's got to be the armpit of the earth when it comes to conservation. Yeah. There's a lot of changes and a lot of differentiation of what's going on there compared to other organizations and entities and states. You know, Charles and Mike with Howl for Wildlife have done a great job trying to figure out a way to navigate and formulate, a plan of action. And while they have a good strategy, and I told you this, they have to have boots on the ground people in different states to be able to turn around and mechanize and weaponize what Howl for Wildlife has become. Without that, it's useless.
Right.
You can't do what they want to do, and we can't do what we want to do unless it's collective and it's an alliance and it's directed toward the same common goal. And the same common goal is a consistent message for the right reasons in a timely fashion that is well-funded and that you can bring out the things like what we're talking about messaging on the Wildlife Council side.
Yeah.
But it has to be consistent straight across the board. And then it goes to the commission, then it goes to the legislature, then it goes back to the voters. I made a presentation, I don't know, 8 years ago, and I talked about the spider web network. And if you look at a spider web and you turn around and run your finger down through it, there's a break in there. And all these guys over here can't communicate with those ones over there.
Yeah.
But a full web, you can turn around and go any particular direction. And I look at a spider web, to some of the younger generation out there, they wouldn't maybe understand this, but a road atlas.
now you're really pulling one out of the depths there, Dan.
A road atlas, for anybody who hasn't seen a Rand McNally road atlas. My grandpa told me years and years and years ago when we were going on a road trip, I said, well, how far is it to there? And I think it was St. Louis, Missouri. And he said, well, it depends on what direction you can go. He said, because if you look at the road atlas of the United States, there's 12,000 different roads to get to that. It's just how you get there. I think a spider web's the same thing, and I think that wildlife advocacy and conservation is the same way. But we have a tendency to look at the distance to get there, one way to get there, and we don't do a very good job because we're not talking to the general public. We're not talking to the target audience. We're talking amongst ourselves.
Right.
And amongst yourselves, you go with that straight line. Well, that looks like it's a dead end or it's a thoroughfare.
Right.
If you want to support a company that supported the efforts to defeat Proposition 127, then you need to support Davis Tent. Davis Tent has provided quality canvas goods for outdoorsmen for the last 50-plus years. For more information, go to davistent.com. If you want to support another business that was instrumental in helping us defeat Proposition 127, check out Salida Gun Shop. Salida Gun Shop in Salida, Colorado provides quality products, expertise, and knowledge from individuals that actually do what they sell. Go to salidagunshop.com. Listen to the advice of Cameron Haynes and support companies that are supporting your cause and your efforts. Minturn Anglers is one of those companies. Minturn Anglers provides product and fishing excursions in Colorado and are second to none. For more information, go to minturnanglers.com.
That's an interesting thing you point out, and it's one that I've talked about a lot. Recently had some guests on the podcast, Ryan and Jillian, talking about how we need to get outside our own camp and talk to the people who are probably interested in what we have to say. They probably have a very high interest in wild food and conservation and clean air and clean water, but we stay in our own little camps. And we talk amongst ourselves, and we kind of have this look over your shoulder approach of, oh, I think someone's here to lay the pipe to us. When really, as you found out in your campaign strategies, there's a lot of people out there who are open-minded about this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you read all the research that's there about people who feel that they're under threat because they're a smaller percentage of population, we almost create our own self-fulfilling prophecy by thinking everybody's against us. And if that's the approach you take, the way you communicate with them, the way you interact or decide not to interact, you almost fulfill that fear or that belief you have.
Yeah.
And you leave all these potential advocates as low-hanging fruit for people with other arguments. And
I said something during the campaign, and I think it was about we did the rally on the 18th of October, and I did a podcast the week after that. So that had been like the 26th or something. It was about 10 days before the election. And one of the most interesting stories that I've been able to tell was in Canyon City, 16,000 people where I live. There was a family that lived across the road from another individual. And on a Sunday morning in October, the guy was out mowing his yard. Now this is on a track home type, street.
Subdivision.
Yeah. And he sees about 8:30 in the morning, he sees the truck back up to the neighbor's house over across the street. He sees the dad get out and the daughter get out, and they open the garage door, and he backed the truck up a little bit farther, and they seen him unloading something. Looked like he was carrying a body. Didn't know what it was.
Oh, no.
So they closed the door. So he just can't stand it. I mean, he's known these people for 12 years. He's lived across the street from them for 12 years. So he waits a little bit, and the garage door comes up, and he pulls the truck up to the front of the driveway and stuff. And so he walks over, and he's done cutting his grass. He walks over, and he's like, hey. He said, I just wanted to say hi on a nice Sunday morning, and I wasn't trying to be nosy or anything, but just what the hell were you doing? And he goes, what do you mean? He says, well, I seen you. You backed up there, and you and your daughter. He said, well, it's her first antelope hunt, and she got her license this year, and so we went out and harvested an antelope down south of town. And he goes, you hunt? He says, yeah, we hunt. And he said, well, how long you hunted? And he said, I don't know, 40 years? He goes, I've known you for 12 years. I didn't know you hunted. And so they got to BS a little bit, and they opened the garage door. They saw the antelope hanging in there, and the daughter was trying to start, cut some of the meat off, and it was a doe, so it didn't have a great big set of horns or anything, and so he looks at him and he says, well, that's kind of interesting. You know anything about this mountain lion ballot initiative? And he goes, yeah. He said, that's a bad deal. He says, matter of fact, I was going to put a yard sign out here, but I didn't want to. He said, you got a yard sign? And by the end of the conversation, he put a yard sign in his across the street, and he had one on his side. But my point being is that how many people do we deal with on a regular basis? And I saw this, on a large scale throughout the entire campaign. People respect people's opinions that they know, and they're willing to turn around and take the guidance and advice on things that they don't know from people that they do know, whether it's family workers, congregation, co-workers, whatever. And I think that we take for granted, like you said, that everybody's against us.
Right.
So we hide it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying you got to turn around and run down the road in a 56 DeSoto with a great big elk hanging off the top and a deer on the hood.
Yeah.
But I think that we as a society have understood conservation, even when we're not around it, and they need to be educated about it. They know when they go to Whole Foods or City Market or King Supers or whatever, they know where the meat aisle is, and they know where the dairy section is, and they know where to go get the fish out of there. And that's why there's so many restaurants that actually serve ribs and steak and chicken and fish, because people are used to eating that stuff.
Yeah.
There's more of a commonality between the general public and the hunting public than there is between a lot of other things out there that most people would just take for granted that everybody's against us, and they're not.
Right.
It's just that they're unknowing, just like the guy that lived across the street from the guy for 12 years and thought they were carrying a body in at 8:30 on a Sunday morning.
No, that's a perfect example of, I think, a lot of times we want to talk in our own little circle, and then we wonder why people don't understand why we hunt, why we're so passionate about conservation and species and everything else. Well, if you're only going to talk to people who behave like you do, you're probably not going to be much of a missionary of spreading our message.
Exactly.
And my grandma was a very devout Methodist, and I remember one time her saying, you can't do missionary work in the church. You got to go to the bars and the back alleys if you want to get some good missionary work done. And I think about that. I was probably 9 or 10 years old at the time, and it stuck with me. But it really does have an application to my life today, and that being, if I want to just talk with my same parishioners in my church, no one else is going to hear my story.
No.
And no one else is going to have reason to connect to it or believe me when the time comes that I'm really passionate about this and I feel strongly that this is what's best for us. Why? Because I didn't go to the back room and bars to do my missionary work.
I went during the campaign. I told you this earlier, Randy. I went through the campaign. And at times, I went to over 30 different Democratic caucus meetings, mm-hmm. some of which were dinners and had 300 or 400 people. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, if not all times, I was the only Republican that was there. It was a Democrat. It was a presidential election year. Mm-hmm. I was the only guy that was probably looking for a steak while they had tofu in one line and they had fish and chicken in the other line.
Yeah.
And we got more of a praise from those groups because we were talking, not because it was Dan Gates, and not because I was wearing a bear claw and I had a big beard and I was wearing a beaver felt cowboy hat talking about Ordinance 308. It's because we were talking about science in the wild from the Wildlife Council side, which was a public message,
Yeah.
and we were talking about science-based wildlife management,
Yeah.
which when I got to speak in front of people, more often than not, the last words that I said during my presentations was, on a parting shot, don't listen to me, don't listen to my enemy, listen to the experts.
Yeah.
The experts, the science-based wildlife managers that have PhDs and master's degrees that have dedicated their life to science-based wildlife management. Not to somebody who's trying to take it away and not just somebody who's trying to save it. I'm saying listen to the experts. The antis are saying don't listen to the bearded guy, don't listen to the Wildlife Deserve Better people, don't listen to CRWM, and don't listen to CPW. Right. They didn't want anybody to listen to anybody but them.
Right.
And I think that the general public, for the most part, understands that there's a difference between right and wrong. And I think that that's why when you saw in Florida, an overwhelming majority of people voted for the right to hunt and fish. Mm-hmm. That's why they've got those done in multiple other states. I think there's 28 or 29 states now that have the right to hunt and fish.
Yep.
It's not because they're supporting some bloodthirsty, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal out there. It's because they're supporting the science and the right to be able to turn around and provide for yourself and to manage wildlife accordingly.
Yep.
And the North American model of wildlife conservation provides that. We have to figure out a way to continually prop it up, to argue it. People are trying to erode and degrade it as we speak.
Yep.
And I think that when we support the science, when we support the facts and the driven statistics that are out there, we might lose sometime, but we're not going to lose based upon the facts. We're only going to lose on emotion.
Yeah. Well, and if for some reason, if you fear the science, that just says something about you, right? You're like, well, if the science says I need to change this and you would refuse to do that, you pretty much lose any solid footing about the integrity of your position about science-based management.
Yeah, and I want to throw in, since you mentioned that, because I argued the science during COVID.
Yeah.
But 6 months is not science as far as I'm concerned. 125 years is science.
Yeah.
And it's adaptive. And it's moldable, and it can be maneuvered a little bit here and there. But during the COVID side, because we had people all the time came out during the campaign and says, well, if you're going to support the science, why don't you believe it? Okay, well, there's a difference. Science for 6 months is a theory. Mm-hmm. Science for 125 years, when you got multiple years of studies and documentation and improved enhancement of habitat and populations and so forth, that's science.
Right.
And I think that when you laid that out there, how do you want your wildlife appropriately managed? Most people could make the educated decision to say, I want it done appropriately, and I want it done in perpetuity.
Yeah. I agree 100% that the average person is more in our camp than we ever give credit to.
Oh, yes.
And hopefully people take from this and all the other messaging that they hear that, you know what? We shouldn't be so bashful about sharing our story and talking about this. And we shouldn't approach it as though by default everyone's against us. By default, most people are open-minded for us. So
they want to make educated decisions, and they want to be able to turn around and make sure that their kids have what they have, whether they choose to hunt or pursue wildlife or not.
Yeah.
But as long as it's done appropriately.
Yeah.
And, with all the partners that we built up over the course of the last 10 or 11 years, and specifically over the last 18 or 19 months prior to 127 or during 127, I can't say enough about the optimism or the enthusiasm that I have on many, many times that I thought, well, we're screwed. and then you'd get to talking to people and like, well, maybe we're not as screwed as bad as what I thought we were.
Right.
And then it proved its point.
Yeah, and I think you guys, you demonstrated that so well. I've kept you for a long time, Dan.
We just appreciate the opportunity.
You showed up here in my studio, but I said, well, how about we put this on both of our podcasts?
Yeah, so and I appreciate that.
What's your podcast called?
Through the Gates.
Yeah.
Through the Gates. I'm figuring, I got to come up with something where people remember my dumbass name. So it's Through the Gates to Save the Hunt, but you can look up any of the platforms, and it's audio and video. Sean Ender is our biggest production guy. And then I got to give a shout out to the Mountainside podcast with Bobby Marshall. Bobby helped carry us on and off was a significant part of our campaign last year. We did 86 podcasts last year on I don't know how many different platforms.
Wow.
And I mean, I was a podcast junkie.
I bet you were. I have the Hunt Talk podcast and the Elk Talk podcast. I don't know that I did 86 podcasts.
No, there was things that I did that we did 5 and 6 podcasts in a week, and there was places that I went that we did a show and I'd do 5 or 6 podcasts at a show in 3 or 4 days, and people say, well, what'd you do last week? And I'd get to thinking, I'm like, I have no idea what I did. I don't even know where I was last week. And actually, when we started this podcast through the gates, we just wanted to continue to build off the momentum that we were able to accomplish over the entire campaign, and not so much to turn around and do anything of notoriety to fame. I told you, and I told this many, many times, I didn't have the intestinal fortitude or the funding or the strategy or the playbook to rebuild what we considered to be a formidable army.
Yeah.
And so we needed to figure out some way, shape, or form. And Bobby has allowed us to utilize his studio, and we've still captured and mooched off the generosity of guys like you and Cable Smith and Rockcast. And it's remarkable that we've been able to do the run that we've been able to do on politics.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. We're not selling product. We got a shopping cart on the website, and you can buy shirts and hats and whatever.
The website is?
The website's SaveTheHuntColorado.com.
SaveTheHuntColorado.com.
Yep.
Okay.
The podcast is Through the Gates, and then we're on Instagram and Facebook. And anybody that hasn't seen us, or I'm sorry, but if you have seen us, I'm sorry. I mean, we're to a point, But I wanted to mention, if I don't mind.
No, we got to put the plug in here because I always tell people donate generously because conservation doesn't happen by a bake sale.
No.
And I think you've got something here that people might want to know about.
Yeah, so we got another 2 raffles. Last year we did a couple raffles with the Colorado chapter of Safari Club International. We did some fabulous fundraisers. Mm-hmm. This year, the Colorado chapter of Safari Club, and this is just the first 2 of 4 that we're doing this year with them. We've got a elk hunt in Colorado with Sangre de Cristo Outfitters, and it's on the Mountain Meadows Ranch. It takes 22 points to draw this hunt, and this includes the voucher and a 5-day guided hunt. The elk typically on there are anywhere from 320 to 370, but this is a badass hunt, and you can go to SaveTheHuntColorado.com, or you can turn around and go to scicolorado.org, and their tickets are $50 a piece or 3 for $100. Yeah. And then in conjunction with that, there's a Gunworks Nexus rifle that Gunworks and the Slida Gun Shop have donated, along with I think it's an Acura, I don't know, it's about a $3,000 scope, I think.
Okay.
But you can go to the same website, SaveTheHuntColorado.com. It'll link you over. And the tickets for that are 1 for $50 and 3 for $100 as well. Closing date on those is July 12th.
July 12th?
No, excuse me, June 12th.
June 12th.
June 12th,
okay.
My fault.
All right, I wouldn't want people showing up on July 1st.
I'm a month ahead of time. June 12th, and the drawing will be June 14th.
Okay.
And then we've got some really, really, really big ones coming after this, but these are 2 giant ones to start with.
Yeah.
And like I say, the 22 preference points for this, and you and I talked about this, one of the other ones we got is almost 32 points.
Yeah. Wow.
We will never, if we started applying now, we would never draw in our lifetime.
I'll be dead.
Yeah, we'll be dead and gone.
Yeah.
But these are, it shows, we've got some mountain lion hunts, we've got some buffalo hunts, we've got white-tailed deer hunts, other elk hunts and stuff. People reaching out to us and saying, Dan, thanks for what you guys did last year. How do we support and how do we fund and how do we help carry the momentum?
Yeah.
And it's just remarkable to see this sort of enthusiasm still. So SaveTheHuntColorado.com or scicolorado.org on either one of those.
Okay. What we'll do on the video side of this podcast, there's a QR code on that sign here. I'll take a picture of it. Okay. And on the video side, we'll I don't have my phone. Imagine that. We'll put that up there so people can just scan the QR code.
No, that'd be perfect.
But this is a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so tired of raffles. They're so tired of this. That's what helps
Yeah.
get this done.
Yeah.
And I hear people like, well, the odds are pretty low. You know what? This is a fundraiser.
The odds
This
are better than in this than they are in the
in
state draw.
Yeah, that's true.
The kicker. I mean, it's like the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society that I'm going to this week, which will be a couple weeks old by the time this airs.
Yeah.
But the odds of drawing the state tag at that level through the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society is about 10 times better than actually going through the state draw.
Well,
and so if somebody says, well, it's rigged. No, it's not rigged.
No, it's not. But I'm just here to tell you, Dan, I can't make it down there with Terry and the guys, but I got a lot of tickets in that bucket. Need not be present to win. So,
So you're saying I shouldn't buy any tickets?
No, I'm saying you should. Everybody should buy tickets for all the groups. But yeah, it's the way that you're able to do the great work that you guys do.
Yeah, it's a form that people can turn around and contribute and have a chance at something, as opposed to just aimlessly wandering, seeing who they're going to give an extra $50 or $100 to.
Yeah.
And some of these other ones that we'll have later in the year, we'll be able to turn around and cross-pollinate and commingle our efforts of messaging.
Yeah.
But this is it's a small opportunity for people to participate. And the token of appreciation is the support. The guys that last year, it was Buckholz, Lawrence Buckholz, and he won the mountain lion hunt that SCI did for us. Mm-hmm. And it was a guided full mountain lion hunt and a full body mount. Wow. And then we had a Nexus Gunworks rifle as well. And Gunworks and Slida Gun Shop have been fabulous. I mean, absolutely fabulous. And I would encourage anybody to look up Salida Gun Shop. I mean, they're big supporters of our efforts.
Great.
But when Buck won, it took us about 3 months to get a hold of him because he kept getting this message from some guy named Dan Gates and another guy, Brett Axton, and he's like, I don't know what these people want. They keep bugging the hell out of me, and then he found out that he won, and they had a fabulous time, harvested a big mountain lion, have been supporters, and it's good to see things go to nice people, but it's good to see things go to people that really dedicated some time and effort and funds into the cause as well. But it's fun to see these things as a success because it is an advertising campaign, right. It is a funding campaign, it is a messaging campaign, and it takes everything outside the box to try to put all these pieces together and make sure that we can sustain our efforts to be able to keep trying to save the hunt.
Yeah. What else you got there? You got Outdoorsman Days.
Yeah, we got Outdoorsman Days. That's August 8th and 9th of 2025. And for more information, anybody can go to ColoradoOutdoorsmansDays.com. And we've got a plethora of individual sponsors and presenters. Fred Eichler's going to be there, and Jermaine Hodge, and Ray Livingston, and Laramie Sasquatch Miller. Have you ever seen a guy by the name of Jake Bowl out of New England?
No, I haven't.
New England Naturals.
Huh.
You like beaver trapping.
Oh, yeah.
You need to look him up.
Really?
He's a biologist out of New Hampshire, and he's coming to do a presentation. Cool. But he's a beaver trapper, and he's just a badass kid. I mean, he just really is. And so he's coming to do a presentation. But we got a big fundraiser banquet there. We've got hunter education classes. We got archery competitions, chuck wagon dinners, gold panning, mountain man encampments, seminars and vendors, and wild game skinning contest and wild game calling contest. And last year during the campaign, we had 4,600 people.
Wow. And where's this at?
It's in Florence, Colorado, just south of Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And so if anybody's put it on your calendar. August 8th and 9th
of 2025.
And, make sure you look up ColoradoOutdoorsmansDays.com. It'll come right up, and you can buy tickets for the dinner or get any of the other information that your heart desires. So
cool.
We just appreciate your support, your help, helping us continue the message, because without guys like you, it's just me standing on a street corner hollering, the British are coming, the British coming.
Nah, Dan, you are the typical Dan, deflect the praise to everyone else, and I appreciate that, but that's what my platforms are for.
Thank you very much.
I see how hard you guys have worked, how much strategy and expertise that you guys have brought to something as critical as what happened last November in Colorado. And you're just so generous with your time and expertise to anyone who asks.
I try to be.
You are. Not try. You are. And the time you've spent here today, and I
yeah,
really
but it's been
appreciate
reciprocal. You've given me a lot of insight and a lot of enthusiasm and opportunity in my own head. Because as I explained, my rat in my cage goes around and around and around. And I think sometimes he's going to pee or he's going to eat. One of the two. I'm just not sure which one. So.
Well, I think you and I have said this many times, our shared background of trapping and all the other stuff that we love to do is we both feel pretty blessed to live in a country where we get to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And we don't ever take that for granted. It's important to both of us and most of our listeners that next generation of people have these same opportunities. In all this work that you've done and the people in Colorado that you work with, the team you've put together, it's all been towards that end.
It's been all toward that end. And what I would hope that people take away from these type of conversations, we're not talking about ballistics and broadhead tips and it'd
be easier if we were.
Yeah, but I would just hope that people don't take things for granted and don't think that it can't come to your door. Because if you think it isn't or hasn't, it likely is behind the scenes, and they're waiting to pounce. They're waiting to win in places like Colorado. As Shane Mahoney says, wildlife does not happen by accident. Well, victories don't happen by accident either. And I would hope that people would, if nothing else, these type of conversations motivate people enough to say, maybe we ought to pay attention a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe we ought to get engaged a little bit. Maybe I'll just turn around and give that 8 hours a year.
Yeah.
And write a letter or contact my legislator or go to a commission meeting.
Yeah.
And if all that stuff happens, I think we'll come out of this on the good side. And if it doesn't, I'm not so sure how much longer we can continue to do at every single level that we do it.
Right. Well, I think you and I are both going down with that ship. If it goes down, we're going down with it.
I got my finger in the hole right now. So no, I appreciate all the time and effort that you've given, and anything we've asked you to do, you've been more than generous with your time, and it's been a remarkable ride so far. But this horse ain't broke, and we ain't got bucked off yet. So
nope, I got more trail to travel.
Follow us on Through the Gates, and look forward to working with you at any level. And if you draw a tag down there and you want to come over and go trapping, and after that, you're more than welcome to.
Well, you might have time to trap this year without a ballot initiative.
God, I hope so. So do my ranchers.
Yeah. So SaveTheHuntColorado.com.
Yep.
Is the CRWM website.
Yep, and you can find anything. Actually, you can go through the gates and find that on the Save the Hunt. But about anything we do, you can find on SaveTheHuntColorado.com.
Yeah. Well, folks, thanks for being here. Dan, thanks so much. Appreciate it as always.
Appreciate it, Randy.
Look forward to the next time. Let's talk about something
fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Through the Gates. For more content like this, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe on all of our channels.